Good day, ladies and gents. This is Allegory to Zeitgeist with Alex and Byron. Have you ever been enjoying a movie or TV show, reading a great story, or just watching the world roll on by, and found yourself wondering what would happen to all this if? Perhaps you want to sprinkle a little chaos into the mundane, or maybe you're just curious about the minutiae of an extraordinary situation. Of course you've wondered about it. It's natural curiosity. You wouldn't be you if you hadn't, and let's face it, who doesn't like you? Well, in summation, that's pretty much the gist of our show. We'll be delving into the fantastical worlds of superheroes, TV shows and film. We're getting meta about movies and overthinking everything. If you're an intrepid cognitive explorer and that sounds like your barrel of whiskey or your particular brand of weird, then empty out your fun bags and get ready to fill them right back up again with something entirely stranger. Fair warning, we will be talking about all manner of movies and TV shows and everything in between. So there'll be a spoiler warning in effect in perpetuity. Although, in fairness, our references are largely about things that are either so popular or so old that if you're uninformed, then shame on you. Get yourself down to Blockbuster and rent yourself a VHS and you'll be up to date in no time. And now, with all the ado out of the way, let's get straight to our next episode. Okay, today we're talking all things zombies. We're going to cover prepping, we're going to cover survival guides, vehicles, zombie culture. First off, zombies and the way they exist in the world. In, I think back as far as 1932, you got White Zombie, Victor Halperin's zombie film, which is probably the first mainstream appearance of zombies. And culturally, I think it's probably fair to say they go back much further than that, particularly in Haitian culture and things like that. But why are they so prevalent? Why have they endured? There's a lot of people that talk about the way it speaks to the state of mankind and things like that, and consumerism and stuff like that. We're going to look at it from more of I'm going to say more of a humorous perspective, particularly the fun aspects, survival guides and pop culture in terms of movies, games, TV shows regarding zombies and that kind of stuff. But I think it's probably fair to say zombies have endured so much, ironically, because it does speak to something more visceral in the within human beings and the way that we live our lives. First of all, let's establish the rules. Specifically, I feel like I say that a lot. I don't know why, but I feel like I need to be succinct with these things. Zombies that we're talking about and the interactions therein in the world of these zombies that we're going to be talking about are going to be George A. Romero, Shaun of the Dead style zombies. Your classic, atypical zombies. They're not going to be ones that run after you. They're going to be ones that drag their feet, moan a lot. But when they get hold of you, you're pretty much buggered. So, what would you do in a zombie apocalypse? You and those that you live with are at home, and zombie apocalypse kicks off. You're watching the news, and very much in the same way. Let's, for argument's sake, say very much in the same way as Shaun of the Dead. It's announced that the undead are coming back to life, and things are the proverbial's hitting the fan. What do? You've got about a week's worth of supplies, food, drink, medicine, etc. You've got the available technology of the world that you inhabit, your laptops, your TV, your phone, and all that sort of stuff, but only for a limited period. So you've got 24 hours until these signals that operate the network of these things are going to be down. Mains electricity is available for the first 48 hours. It affects the entire planet. Governments, armies and police cannot be relied upon. So they will be in the world, they can't be relied upon. And that's pretty much it. If you get bitten by one of these things, you're going to turn, but we're working on the assumption it's slow, probably over a 24-hour period, as you would see in old-fashioned zombie films and that kind of thing. So it's it can arguably be slightly different for some people, but certainly not to the extent of, let's say, Army of the Dead, where some people turn really quickly and then randomly you've got a character who has enough time to get on a plane and fly across the country and land, and then finds out he's turning into a zombie. We're not going to go quite that far, with all due respect to Zack Snyder. So, Byron, what's your plan? That's happened. The shit's hit the fan. Zombies are coming. What do you do?
The main thing that's always kind of stuck with me from watching a lot of these sort of films and TV shows is moving quickly, because there's always a limited number of supplies in any given area, and of course there's such limited time ultimately that the more you kind of dawdle, then those kind of are going to be taken by other people, and then you get to the point where there's no supplies to help keep you boxed in your safe space anymore, to the point where you're forced to then go out and do these things. And then in the world of these TV shows, not only do you have to come up against the undead, but other groups and bandits, and even sometimes just other innocent people who are trying to feed their families. So it's that kind of battle there where you kind of not only need food, but you need some of the obvious things. If you've got no electricity, you need things like batteries to power any of the kind of devices you have, especially if it's medical related, equipment, etc. So I'd say it's a matter of moving very, very quickly, which of course is a risk in of itself, because if everyone else is doing the same thing at the same time, then obviously there's a lot of panic. It's like Black Friday on steroids or something, potentially. But
I think you got two options really, haven't you? Either move very quickly straight away, or you hunker down for a little while and then move very strategically afterwards. But there's obviously downsides to both. Like you're saying, if you go out immediately, you're going to have to battle the worst of humanity. That not dissimilar, in fairness, to what we've seen in the last 18 months during the pandemic and everything. There's been there's been real world scenarios which were startlingly similar to the beginnings of a zombie film. I don't think that's unfair to say. So you are going to see the worst of humanity. You're going to see people fighting each other, and because out of desperation trying to keep themselves or their families alive. So you either deal with that right off the bat and run the risk of maybe it going really badly, or you getting a decent amount of supplies, potentially a decent vehicle out of it, or getting clear of the danger zone, or I guess you hunker down for a little while and wait and see where when the smoke settles what's available to you, and plan your steps much more methodically afterwards. But then there's probably going to be less available to you and less resources. That you run the risk of being attacked while you're hunkering down, either by zombies or by people. I don't think there's a good option either way, but I think I'm probably inclined to go with you and make a move quickly. That's probably the best thing to do, because I think if you stay still, you don't know where these zombies are coming from. So in the rules of our game here, you don't know whether anyone anybody has been affected. You don't know whether your neighbour is a zombie. You don't know anything apart from the fact that there is an outbreak and that you've got limited time with the facilities that are available to you before they become ineffective. So yeah, move quickly. What do you do after that? Where are you going first? So you're at home, you've seen the news. I'm guessing jump in your car. I think let's have a look at this from two perspectives, because I want to let's look at it from the position of where we are in terms of where we live in the world and the resources that we've got, and then for shits and giggles we'll have a look at what would you do in a perfect world scenario in a zombie apocalypse, because I think that's going to be a bit of fun, but also a much shorter conversation, because you can do whatever you like in that world. But in our world, with these rules, you've seen it on the news, you know you're going to act quickly. What do you do?
So one of the obvious things that I say was a lot of the people do in the kind of, again, the films and TV shows, which makes a lot of sense, but it's that whole head and heart thing, is other members of your family, the extended members of your family. So obviously not the ones you're living with, but often the parents and close friends, things like that. Obviously these are people who are not with you at the time. Sometimes you might not quite know what's going on with them, if they're safe, etc. But then if you think about building a new world, a new kind of safe settlement for yourself, you kind of want them a part of it. So is there an attempt to try and reach them? If you've got where we're saying 24 hours for communications, that's probably what we're going to wind up doing. Make sure everyone's all right, come up with a plan to actually meet up so that you can actually still communicate with each other, because after 24 hours you can no longer communicate. You just have to go old school and go to where you think they are and hope for the best ultimately. So that's a strong one, so obviously that's going to vary between people. But for myself, of course, you need to reach out to family and try and kind of bring them into the fold, make sure they're safe, and then kind of work on a plan together. So that's where obviously a vehicle or something is comes in handy. Ultimately, you've got your own one, hopefully.
So it's like when we were kids, when you used to have to go and knock for your mates. Because you couldn't, yeah, you couldn't text him. You'd have to go and knock. Is Byron in? Oh no, he's out with his other friend. He's got other friends. Oh no, I've been left behind. And then but that in a zombie world, I think that's probably what we're looking at.
Yeah, there's a major kick in that, isn't he? He's out with his other friends in a zombie apocalypse, and he forgot about you. So
he's taken the time to choose the people that were important to him, and he forgot me. I think that says a lot about me and you, because I didn't even think about going to look for other people. That didn't enter my mind. Not one little bit. My first thought was, let's go and get what I can from the supermarket. Let's steal a really good car, or like a big truck or something, and then load it up with supplies. Just to be clear, that's not what happened in the pandemic. I was not one of those people before I started getting attacked for it. I did not hoard toilet paper and stuff like that. But in a zombie apocalypse, I think you'd be forgiven for hoarding. It's the end of the world. I think I'd probably, if we're like talking like the movie The Postman, and there's an apocalyptic world, but then eventually society rebuilds itself again, and then we look back on that period, I think people would be forgiven. Maybe not the people that are stealing like big TVs and stuff like that. Maybe the people that are stealing food and supplies to keep themselves alive, I think you'll give them a pass during a zombie apocalypse, just putting that one out there. But vehicle-wise, I think that's, okay, so communication is a fair point. You've got limited time, you want to get in touch with family members and friends and things. Maybe there's strength in numbers, potentially, if you can find somewhere to, get together and hunker down. But we don't have access to, contrary to what Americans may think, we do have firearms in this country, but it's not something that's widely seen. We live in the countryside, more or less. We live in small towns in the southeast, so there's a lot of rural communities, a lot of farmers and things like that. Wouldn't be too difficult to get a shotgun from somewhere, but you then run the risk of having to get that from somebody who's not going to want to give it up, and they're armed and you're not. So in reality, we've got what's available to us immediately, or if you can ram raid a sporting goods store, you be able to get bats and things like that, which I've always thought was probably the best weapon in a zombie apocalypse anyway, a baseball bat, because you've watched all The Walking Dead, you might be able to give me a more informed perspective, but with guns, you rely on ammunition, and they're good for range, which is obviously ideal for zombies. You want to keep them away from you. But if you're in a position where you need to crack some zombie heads, I think things like machetes are only going to do so much. In films and TV shows, you might see someone cleave somebody's head off, but it's not an entirely realistic use of a machete. I mean, they're pretty much useless for cutting through undergrowth. Baseball bat, you can keep swinging as long as you've got strength in your body. They're not especially heavy, and that will definitely cave someone's head in if you swing it hard enough. I think you could swing that in a circle if they start coming at you from different positions. Go full like Bart and Lisa Simpson and just start swinging your arms and legs around until you hit everything. I think it's a pretty useful thing to have on you at all times, to be fair. Thoughts on the weapon? Well, because you're going out into a dangerous situation, you're trying to move quickly, you get out into the world. What are you taking with you? What have you got in the house now that you would take with you? I've got a baseball bat next to my bed, don't ask why.
In terms of what I have now, God, that's not good. That's like proper old school wife in the 50s, like a frying pan kind of deal.
That might work.
Really. Got a kettlebell, but that's more or less guaranteed to get me killed rather than kill anything else. If I'm really good, I might be able to get one before that's the end of me ultimately.
You've got a metal railing and where you like a hook for things in your kitchen that's like 2 feet long. Is that
Yeah,
metal or is that plastic? I realise no one can see this, by the way, so I'm being really particular with my description. If it's metal and it's just a bar, you could rip that off the wall and start swinging it at people.
I think you could, but I don't think that would. It's one of those things where if you hit someone in the head, it will really hurt, but I don't think it's going to like.
It's going to be Austin Powers, isn't it? Like, who throws a shoe?
I think that's pretty much how it'd be. I mean, I've got some quite sharp IKEA knives that are meant for like. I love
the fact you had to brand them. Yeah. To say, like, we've got to put that in there. It's from like they're IKEA knives, by the way, or like I have John Lewis knives. I trump you.
Other shopping places are available.
Yeah, exactly. So you're standing there in like Halfords or something, trying to get a load of equipment, and you're like standing in the aisle with a person opposite you in some sort of weird jewel of kitchenware where they've got the John Lewis knives, and you have to concede your IKEA knives. You're like, you got me. All right, you can have the car batteries. I'm going. You win. And then you wait till they turn their back, and you stab them with your IKEA knives and take their John Lewis knives, which are probably all made in the same factory in Taiwan anyway. To be fair, so
that's branding for you, isn't it? Just put a different logo on.
Yeah, we've got to put these ones are for Sainsbury's. These are for IKEA. They're all made from the same place. Okay, so have you ever thought of like a complete scenario? From like, I've heard the news, I leave the house, this is where I'm going for supplies, this is what I'm taking with me, and this is where I'm going to end up. Like, what's the end game? Because I've thought about a number of scenarios. Like, your local supermarket, for example, you get these big supermarkets that sell everything now, like your extra stores and things like that, where they've got everything in there. The back areas of places like that are pretty well supported because you've got secure doors, and which you've got that glass in it, which is wire lined, so they can't be broken through, and they've got them, them pin code deadlocks and stuff like that. They've got, they've usually got pretty secure doors at the back to stop people getting in. But obviously, the whole supermarket area, like the shop floor area itself, is completely exposed because there's a lot of big glass windows and they're designed for people to come in. So you could collect a load of stuff up, but if you're going to hunker down in somewhere like that, your only hope is in the staff area, and I'm not entirely convinced that's the most secure place in the world. You could try maybe a prison if you got one near you, which we have, but then, I mean, presumably when this all happens, there's going to be people in the prison. There's going to be staff there. There's going to be inmates. How do you get yourself into a prison, even in an apocalypse, and then make it secure? If you've gotten in there, it couldn't have been that secure in the first place, presumably. Or do you keep moving? Which leaves you open. But we live near a river. I did think about maybe going and stealing a boat and sailing off somewhere and hoping for the best. But then you're at the mercy of the fates. Then. You certainly stand a good chance of being away from the chaos and away from the zombies, because these types of zombies don't move through water. I know there have been some cases where certain films and such where that happens, but we're talking about classic zombies. You're safe on the water, or if you can get to an island that was uninhabited originally, then you're going to be fine because there wasn't anyone there to become infected. So that seems like we live near an island, but it's when the tide's out, you can walk to it, so that's not entirely secure. Mind you, you can only walk on and off one way. So now I'm thinking out loud about it. That might not be a bad idea. Nobody lives on it. You could probably fortify it without too much difficulty. But again, we're in a scenario where you can't shoot anyone. We could maybe get our hands on a bow and arrow, but I'm not entirely sure how effective I'm going to be with one of those. I don't know about you. I think it probably looks easier on TV than it is in real life. Anyone that's got experience with archery, hit us up in the comments, let us know. But I don't think it's going to be as easy as it looks on like Arrow, where you can stand 50 feet away and like pierce someone's eye or something like that. Maybe it is, but I doubt it. What do you think? I think in the real world, people are going to be trying to get onto your island, and you're either going to be hitting them with your car, or you're going to be using your baseball bat to keep them away. So I'm struggling now to think of a good scenario in which you would be able to hunker down, given our current resources in our geographical location, in which you're going to be okay, because we don't really have access to anything that is really secure around here, or weapons or anything like that. So maybe just moving is the best. What do you think? I'm going to put myself out there and say, from my perspective, under these rules, best scenario for me is to steal a boat locally and sail down the river and try and find somewhere offshore or somewhere in the estuary that is uninhabited, that isn't accessible except by boat. Because then at least you'll see people coming and you can warn them off. You could maybe even fashion like a gun-shaped type of thing from a nearby tree or something that you've whittled down, so from a distance it looks like you've got a gun, to try and warn people off. There might be things that you can do, and at the very least it buys you time. So for me, I'm getting my family in the car, I'm taking everything we've got in the house, food and supplies wise, and seeing if we can get to the shop before anybody else does, because we live quite close to one, taking as much as I can fit. And then we're going to a boat, we're going to steal it, I'm going to nick some diesel on the way from the petrol station, and then we're going down the river to see if we can hunker down somewhere and start living like the Swiss Family Robinson, I guess, without any power and stuff like that. We'll just make do with what we got. But I guess you're going to have to let things like that go in zombie apocalypse and hope that maybe one day down the line you're going to have access to Netflix again. It's just... I think maybe there's larger concerns. So that's my plan, and it's open for criticism. What's your plan? What are you doing?
Oh, no, plan's not going to have any kind of criticism to it. Everyone's going to have like pros and cons, aren't they? Really, it's just the way it is. There's never going to be a perfect scenario. Otherwise, that would have come up before in all these sort of films. My initial one is probably unusual. I can't imagine too many people have maybe thought about it before, of all things. But it's going to a garden centre.
Okay.
Because I always find, I'm really quite surprised that in all these ones, not even just zombie ones, even you take
there's a lot of weapons. A lot of weapons in there.
Yeah, weapons as well. That's a strong part of it. But I always find even in any post-apocalyptic scenario, not even just zombies, you take a film like The Road, everyone is just desperately rummaging through houses trying to find like non-perishable goods like tins, cans, bottles of water, stuff like that. But obviously there's a limit to those, and other people will often get there first as well. But you go to a garden centre, aside from obviously just the weaponry and everything as well, and it's got some basic security, being that it's a store and it's trying to deter thieves and things like that, you've got the ability to continue to grow your food forever. Which is what a lot of these places tend to realise down the line, but not to start with, because they're so busy running around cities and town centres trying to find stuff. But if you could, kind of fortify this place as best you can and kind of have that sorted. Ideally, it'd be one that's sort of near the water, a little bit like yours, where you can almost like do everything you can there, but then you start shipping some stuff to maybe a nearby island for security. So if shit really does hit the fan and suddenly your garden centre gets overrun, you can quickly just jump in your boat, go down there, and already you've made a good start on some island. So if you've lost your garden centre on the coast, you can then begin again on the new island, and it's not suddenly, oh my god, we've lost everything we ever had, let's just go wandering amongst towns and forests like they do in other TV shows and films. You've kind of got your backup sorted, and you can kind of go between the two, which obviously means you could even build a community. It doesn't need to literally just be, you and your immediate family. You can bring new people into it. So we're talking, doctors, engineers, people who have good uses, bring them in, and you can guarantee them a certain amount of security and free food for life.
Oh, we are saying under the classic zombie rules as well that things that have come along in various other incarnations, like zombie animals, zombie birds and such, that's not what we're talking about here. So if you find yourself on a farm, which as I say, we live close to quite a few, then help yourself to some burgers, I guess, or smarter, steal a cow because milk, you can start to churn your own butter and cheese and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure that's probably not a bad idea. Downloading a butt ton of PDFs of stuff before your internet access goes, getting a load that. So from what you've said and what's just occurring to me now, I think, and I don't see any preppers doing this. Because I've watched tons of these prepper things because I find it fascinating. But what would be really useful to you is stockpiling seeds, because they take up next to no room. They're not heavy in the slightest, even if you've got loads of them, and they're going to be incredibly useful to you. And most plants are going to produce their own seeds, so they're constant replenishment if you nurture them. But also get a hard drive that's full of how-tos on stuff, I guess, like medical how-tos and growing things, fixing things, engineering stuff, and then you don't need, you could get you can get reliable solar panelled, I've seen these things that are like, it's a solar mat that you can roll out on the floor or put it on the roof of your car or whatever, and power your phone from it and things like, or power a USB bank from it. And that's going to be, this is a zombie apocalypse, it's not nuclear fallout, the sun's still shining, you won't need a great deal of sunlight to be able to access your laptop for a small portion of the day. It's not like you're going to have it on all the time. And if you've got a hard drive that's full of loads of stuff, crikey, you can get like a 5 terabyte hard drive now for not a huge amount of money, and fill it with all your favourite shows and movies and songs and pictures of your family and all that stuff, and you'll still have access to it. You won't need a diesel generator or anything like that now. But maybe figure out how to fix it if that thing breaks. Get like a how-to on how I should repair it if it breaks, or buy more than one. If you're in the prepping frame of mind, I suppose you would buy more than one. But I feel like I've gone off on a tangent. But my main point was collect seeds and stockpile a load of how-tos on stuff, because neither of those things are going to take a lot of space or weight. You can put them in a backpack even, potentially. You could have a emergency backpack that you keep in a cupboard in your house that's full of seeds and hard drives, and you'll be okay. So you'll be able to, like, if you get somewhere and somebody gets injured or they break their ankle or something, okay, don't give me 5 minutes, I'll look up how to fix it. You've still got access to all the information. Really, in theory, you could, if you were in like a bunker scenario or military bunker or something like that, I don't know whether they've taken the time to do this, but you could over the course of time download everything useful from the internet. And I specifically put the word useful in there because there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's incredibly amusing, but funny pictures of cats, as much as I love cats, probably not going to be that useful in the apocalypse. The huge amount of porn, entertaining but useful. Download a bit to keep you ticking over, but you're going to need hard drives full of it, or you're going to need your hard drives filled with how do I not get food poisoning, or what do I do if somebody breaks their arm, or how do I repair my solar panels, things that might keep you alive. So that seems like a fair plan. I think mixture of the two here, because I live near a garden centre that is near a river, so I've got like the best of both worlds there. That could work out really well. And you know what, that sounds like a good idea regardless of the zombie apocalypse, because I don't really like people. I might just take a bunch of seeds and set up camp on an island somewhere and wait and see how long it is before someone tries to turf me off of it. Like, there's probably a little patch of land in the estuary somewhere where people will leave me alone because they won't even know that I'm there. It's just like, National Trust land or something, and nobody ever goes there. As long as I don't make too much of a fuss or get the fly mow on and start cutting stuff down, they'll probably leave me alone. And then that sounds like quite a nice little quiet life. We reckon you can come visit sometimes if you want.
Yeah, if there's not a zombie apocalypse and it's easy to get to, then yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, before we move on to the next subject, ideal world scenario. So you Tony Stark, for all or Bruce Wayne or whatever, you're smart enough to be able to and resourceful enough to be able to do pretty much whatever you want. You've got unlimited funds. You've had time to think about this and to prep. The same rules of the world still apply, but now the message comes down the pipe that there's an official zombie apocalypse. What is best case scenario? I think a lot of people's first thing is to, like, oh, well, if that's the case, I've built an underground bunker. And yeah, that's great, but the world is still available above ground, and you're going to be missing out on everything that's going on up there, and you're also going to be kind of cut off from any potential developments, like have the zombies been wiped out? Is society starting to rebuild? You're safe, but you're also shut off. I think maybe kind of a secure above ground settlement with a retreat underground is probably quite a good way to go, because if things really go south and you get one of those scenarios like you get in a film where these people have established a settlement that is secure as fuck, and you're doing really well and people are okay and they're getting by, and then they let in some new people and one of them didn't tell anyone that they were scratched or they were bitten, and you think, you dick, you just doomed everybody now, and then it all goes sideways again. And I think if that happens, you need like contamination procedures in place. So in my ideal little slice of the apocalypse, I've got an AI in place, much in the same way as the Tony Stark may have, that would be able to detect the virus and then isolate people. So maybe within the building structure there are places, there are like sprinkler type systems where it will release a gas that renders them unconscious immediately, and then you can retrieve them, lock them up, and then check for contamination for anyone else and that sort of stuff to make sure it doesn't happen. But in the worst case scenario, your building above ground has been invaded and overrun. You've got a retreat underground. I'm thinking somewhere along the lines of the film Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser and Alicia Silverstone. Don't know whether you remember that. Christopher Walken. Basically, it starts in the 60s during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Christopher Walken's a scientist and engineer, and he's convinced it's all going to go to pot and the missiles are going to get launched. So he's built underneath their house a replica of their house and their garden and like huge storage rooms and stuff like that, and he's tried to make it as realistic as possible. So I'm thinking like a mirror image of what you've got above ground, underground, and above ground I'm thinking a cross between a maximum security prison and one of the nicest houses on Cribs that you've ever seen. So you've got to be entertained, otherwise you're going to go out of your mind. I'm thinking like, high solid walls, no multiple points of entry, no windows or anything like that, but the wall is far away from the main residence, so it's not blocking light and stuff like that. You've got quite a big grounds around it, and outside of the grounds I'm thinking lots of landmines and spikes and those things they used to put on the beaches of Normandy, those big wooden things with spikes in to stop people getting through them, and tie people up, and just a butt ton of razor wire and things like that, all the fun stuff. And then on your wall you've got battlements with all manner of weapons, like you've got a 50 cal Gatling gun, things like that, just in case there's a horde. Flamethrowers, that's always useful. And you probably won't, unless you get overrun, you're probably not going to use that. But what else could you have? I mean, some of the medieval methods are pretty good, like, pour tar over the side, but then you've got to have access to it and you've got to manufacture it and all that stuff. Although it'd be fun to pour it over a big pile of zombies and see what happens, and then throw a match down at them and just watch them all go up in flames. I think that's probably exposing a little bit more of my nature than I'd like to, but yeah, I think that'd be something incredibly secure, wall that goes deep underground, and then you've got one main entrance in and out. But like in the Arkham games, where you get into, I think it's the second one, where you get into Arkham Asylum, there's a main gate, you go through it, and it's like a cage inside of a cage, and there's another series of gates. There's steps to getting in. You can't just walk in the front door. So if you break through the front gate, you're still surrounded by security, and you're still not in yet. So you're fairly secured. You have to be cleared before they let you actually in. And then in the main residential area, everything you'd want or need, cinema, swimming pool, or basketball court, gym, things to stay fit and healthy, to stay entertained, to stay active. None of these things are reliant on external technology. You don't need. You could all be solar powered potentially, or you could have hydroelectric power if you're near a river. That could work. You use them on like a rotating basis, so you don't overuse your power, or people can only use them for limited times. But in terms of like cinema and things like that, but again, all that could be. You could have all of that stuff that you might watch, all those films and TV shows and things like that, backed up digitally. You don't need the internet for it. And that's kind of all you need. Like obviously space to grow food, and that's the other thing about being underground as well. You're relying on very different methods of procuring your own food. You've got to be able to grow stuff in hydroponics and stuff like that. It's probably easier to do it if you're outside, and you can be outside. Plus, you're not in direct sunlight, so you're losing vitamin D and things like that. I think that tends to be the case. You see a lot of people that are like digging out bunkers and repurposing missile silos, but is that the best way to go? If you can, in a perfect world scenario, you've got tons of money, is that the way to go, underground, or what I've just talked about? What do you think? What's your Tony Stark scenario for an end of the world situation?
Ooh, not sure. That's definitely something that's never crossed my mind before. Ultimately, I mean, in an ideal world, obviously, I think a large part of it is obviously creating that kind of community, that settlement where, as you sort of mentioned, you can almost carry on living without constantly remembering you're in a zombie apocalypse. It's not so it's just constantly depressing, just fighting to survive as opposed to actually living. Is obviously pretty key in this sort of scenario. So I suppose it's creating a big settlement. Underground is a good backup, where you could put a lot of stuff down there anyway. I mean, even what they're doing today, they're doing it for sort of temperature regulation and geothermal stuff. Not to say that the technology may be available there, but so that's always a very good sort of scenario. So just kind of creating kind of almost like kind of a walled community, a little bit like maybe the village, but modern as opposed to old school. So it's only the people in there, and then it's kind of almost, I suppose, a little bit old school. Like where the doctor's house is, where the engineer's house is, where everyone is, so you can go and talk to them, and it's not in like modern day where you'd kind of have to go there and fill in forms and pay your money and things like that. It could just be almost like a old school barter system. I do this for you, you do this for me. It's a community thing, which I think is something which we probably even should have these days, even if without zombies.
I completely agree.
So so it's difficult, I suppose, to bring in the Tony Stark side of things and the unlimited wealth and technology and things like that. Obviously, you'd use whatever you could to do that. So it's a lot of the technologies they're bringing in today. So it's obviously things like vertical farming as well. So that can save a lot of space on land mass. We're obviously taking advantage of the fact you can't really grow upwards outdoors, and therefore you have to take up more land mass, and obviously that's going to be very limited if the zombies are all roaming around everywhere ultimately. And obviously you need a process of getting new people into the community, because again with these TV shows, some people cannot be trusted and they'll burn everything to the ground the minute they let them in.
Yeah, you need like a vetting process. You'd need a holding area for people to come in, which is what I was sort of talking about, but that was more for security purposes. But you're right, you would need something to vet people who want to become a part of your community as well. And obviously space to grow. A lot of things like modern farming processes and more efficient, effective ways of living, which is probably what you're going to have to consider in that environment, because you've got limited scope to grow and limited resources, is use of AI, which isn't dependent on having access to the internet and satellites excuse me, things like that. So it's just a matter of the know-how of programming, isn't it? The technology is available. There's countries around the world, like particularly in the Netherlands, where they're using AI to radicalise farming. So there's a lot of things now more than ever that you could do to live a life as if you've got access to the resources and you've got the know-how. There's a lot of things you could do these days to live life as normally as possible if there genuinely was a zombie outbreak. But it's dependent on having access. Do you have that knowledge or some access to somebody with that knowledge? Do you have the resources to develop such a place? Are you remote enough that you could buy yourself the time to build a place like that, or have you had the forethought to do it because you were convinced it was going to happen? So there's a lot of, I think, realistically, without getting in the realms of science fiction, there's a lot of things that you could quite happily live. You could probably live quite a happy life if you were prepared enough and had the money and had the the know-how. And if you don't have the know-how, all you've got to do is secure yourself, and then you've got time to develop the knowledge. Because what else are you going to be doing? If you're not learning stuff to make your life better, what's the point? So the only other thing to consider that we haven't really talked about in that scenario, in either scenario, is a bug out vehicle. What are you travelling in? So in a best case scenario, there's lots of different things that you could custom build something potentially with, like do you go tracks, do you go tyres, what propulsion system are you using? Are you looking for something alternatively fueled? Are you looking for something petrol or diesel? Because there's pros and cons to all of them. And also I think it depends on what kind of zombie infestation you've got where you live, and where you are. And now occurs to me I'm talking about this very seriously, and it seems a little bit peculiar. But let's say, for example, you're in London, you find yourself or you've been sent into London to retrieve something, because these things happen invariably. You need access to something, and you might send a team out from your community to retrieve something. Straight away, I'm going to say tank, or a armoured reconnaissance vehicle of some kind, because there'll be something like that will be slightly faster, but there's no way there's any zombies getting in. You've got the ability to look all the way around you without putting yourself at any sort of risk. The only risk with these sorts of things is as soon as you get out of the vehicle, obviously, then you need to be protected. But then this is something I saw recently, which I hadn't given too much thought to, and you don't see that much in films. I don't know about TV shows like The Walking Dead, for example, but personal protection, like a juggernaut suit, for example, something along those lines. Is it obviously, or in oh man, I can't remember the name of that bomb disposal film that came out a while back with Jeremy Renner, but that kind of thing, like a bomb disposal suit. The Hurt Locker, yeah, that something along those lines. You're completely covered, and it is designed to keep you alive if you're dealing with an explosive directly in front of you. So it's probably fair to say you're going to be okay. If you get a horde of them all over you and you're pinned down, you're going to need to be rescued, obviously, because there's no way you're getting out of that position. But while you're there, they're not getting in either. So that's something you really don't see a lot of, like personal protection. There must be, in these shows in particular, because they tend to explore more. They've got the time to explore more than films have. They've got a limited scope. How much exploration do they do where they find themselves in a military installation? Because that must come up at some point. Have you seen something like that in a TV show or in a film that I might think of? Like they're exploring. Primarily these things are set in the States more often than not. Obviously, there's a number of popular ones that are set elsewhere, but it tends to be the big deal where they're set in the States. So let's put it there for argument's sake. They're exploring, and at some point they must come across a military place. They're dotted all over the country. There's still dotted all over this country in smaller scale, but you haven't got to throw a stone very far to hit a military base. You must. Does anything like that sound familiar? Because I can't think of one.
The only one that come to mind is the girl with all the gifts. Then obviously the children at the start are at a military facility, and then it kind of all goes haywire from the inside out.
Yeah.
Obviously there's loads on the outside trying to get in, but it all starts from the children inside, and then it goes haywire and it works its way out.
I've forgotten about that one.
Yeah,
that wasn't a bad film, that.
Yeah.
It's alright. It's like a sleeper cell zombie film. It lay dormant in my mind until you triggered it just then. There are that one in particular. They're with the military, aren't they? Don't they go on they go out with the military, which I guess is kind of an ideal position to be in if you're going to have to go out and explore, because you've got people that are trained and have the knowledge, and obviously are armed as well. But just specifically vehicle-wise or personal protection, what's your preference? You can pick any type of vehicle you want: flying, aquatic, road-going vehicle. There's ones like Top Gear and the Grand Tour have tested things like this numerous times over the years. It's always entertaining, but there was one, I forget the name of it now, that Hammond tested in South Africa. Giant red vehicle that you could set off a landmine underneath and drive it away. You know, there was no way, and it's big enough. It was like a troop carrier. It's big enough to fit plenty of people in, but there's no way anyone's getting in. It's relatively fast. It had huge ground clearance. Downsides of stuff like that is, if it's something like that, you're going to have to start thinking about alternative fuel systems over time, because you're not always going to have access to petrol or diesel to run the engine. So, but that potentially, if you're in this sort of installation that we're talking about, where you've got time and technology and you've got people that know what they're doing, you could do that. But what do you think? To cover yourself, if you're exposed in a zombie situation, A, what are you picking to protect yourself? And B, what type of vehicle are you picking to get where you need to go to procure things for your settlement?
Oh, that's a tough one, yeah, because I suppose you need to try and cover all the bases, but I don't know if anything's ever going to exist where you can be as safe as possible, get as far as you need to as possible, and have enough storage to get everything you need, be it people or supplies, to and from the location. Obviously, I don't think one exists that can tick all of those boxes ultimately. So I think flight-wise, in an ideal world, you'd need like a helicopter or something, because I suppose they've got more options in terms of landing, I suppose, than a regular plane would.
Are you thinking like a Chinook or something like that? You know, like a big cargo bob style.
I suppose if we're kind of like saying, oh, you can have any you want, obviously you're going to go with the best and biggest, and
because they fit more. If you get somewhere where you're retrieving supplies, you can put a lot in that potentially.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, ultimately. So yeah, that's where you'd want that ideally, so you can use it for multiple reasons, whether it is evacuating, getting out of there, and you don't have to leave people behind or anything like that, or have a big fight over the helicopter or anything like that. So obviously that can take out as many people as possible, and or supplies, where you can obviously make a start somewhere else potentially as a backup, like I mentioned earlier. And on land, I think you'd kind of have to go with a tank under the illusion that you would have unlimited fuel for it. Otherwise, you're kind of maybe looking at a kind of an electric vehicle setup, where if you've got solar set up, then you've obviously got almost unlimited ability to keep fueling your vehicle. If you have a Tesla and a solar bank to the side of your building or house sorted out, then you're kind of okay, providing you don't run out while you're out there and don't have a spare battery and don't have to dump it and lose it ultimately. But who knows, by then electrical vehicles may have taken over the world anyway. So
well, the downside of big heavy equipment is you can use a lot of fuel to move them. As I say, potentially, if you've got the time and you know how to do it, you could retrofit a tank so that it runs off of a different fuel source, but it's always going to be power heavy, and it's going to be slow. And there are tanks or armoured vehicles that move quicker, but they don't move quick. And when you're talking speed, you're not talking car speed. So you're subtracting speed for adding security, but there's no way that anything's getting in. So if you ever end up in a scenario, it really doesn't. That's things are going sideways. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get away from them because they're never getting in. You're fine. I mean, you can even set up things inside of something. Like you could set up a toilet system and like a basic food and drink system, like if you're staying in a travel lodge, for example, and you've got a kettle and a microwave, that kind of thing. You could set up in an ARV. You could set up like a real basic system if you happen to get caught for a prolonged period of time, or it's going to take you longer than you expected to get back. You haven't got to, they're not going to burst the tyres. They're not going to get in. You just need to keep running. So that's the primary consideration. If you do what I see a lot of real life preppers doing and converting pickup trucks and things like that, I guess because they're genuinely doing it and they don't have unlimited funds, they're probably making the best of the situation. But there's a lot of downsides to it. I mean, they're not run flat tyres or anything, and they're big, cumbersome, expensive things to. Well, I don't know that really matters, but they are difficult things to replace if things go wrong. If you've got huge rims and huge tyres and heavy lug nuts and stuff like that, and you haven't got access to a proper mechanics workshop and things start breaking on it and wearing out, then you've got a real problem. And with things like that, you go off-roading in them, they're only going to go so far. I think people have got this idea that they're going to be able to drive over anything, but that most of them won't. They're not designed for that, and a lot of pickup trucks are designed for torque. They're designed for pulling and carrying loads. So you're going to be able to carry a great deal of stuff if you've left your house and you've filled up the bed of your truck with stuff, but then it's an open bed, or it's a bed that's covered with maybe a tarpaulin or something. Okay, so shopping mall, prison, high-rise apartment block, supermarket, yacht, theme park, the Winchester. Zombie fans, you'll probably all be able to pick out where we've got that list from. For example, theme park from Zombieland, Winchester, Shaun of the Dead, etc. Post the rest in the comments. That'd be nice. Let's see if you figured out where we got them from. It shouldn't be too hard. But we're going to give a quick rundown of pros and cons of each of them, and then we're going to nail our favourite to a cross and say that's the best one of the bunch. So, shopping mall, straight off the bat, you've got access to stuff. You're not going to have access to everything that you're going to need. I mean, for example, like we've talked about, growing things and that kind of stuff. That's not something that's imminently practical there, but you're going to have access to food in the immediate future. Plus, depending on what kind of stores they've got there, you might have cold storage of certain food and the means to be able to heat it up and or get something out of the freezer and make food, for example. You're going to have access to clothing. You're going to have access to technology if you can do something with it. But you're also going to be accessible by the zombies. You're going to have to find ways and a means to completely barricade yourselves in. There's a lot of access points, and they are designed as a structure to get people in. So you've got quite a long haul ahead of you to try and secure the place completely, and you've got a lot of property to cover. There'll probably be a security station somewhere where you'll be able to observe all the major entrance points, which is pretty good. But that just because you can see them, it doesn't mean that you've got them secure. So you've got a lot of work to do with something like that. It's great in the short term, I think. You can get, you've got access to a lot of things, but you haven't got access to everything you need for the long term going forward. So I'm thinking shopping mall probably not the best one to set up shop for the long term. Somewhere that you can, if you can find one along your route to wherever your end game is, get in there, get the best that you can out of it, and then move on. What do you think, B?
Yeah, it's definitely not a bad one. It's I think the one major concern is I think that's probably the main one on this list where everyone else will be thinking of going to, more so than anywhere else. One extra benefit, I suppose, which is definitely going to come on to the apartment block side of things, is you go up a level, which of course makes it a lot easier to control, any kind of group of the undead, considering there's not exactly like, easily gliding upstairs and just turn off the escalators and things like that. So therefore you could block those up, so then even if they do get in, they've just got the bottom level, you could be on the second level and you're kind of okay, and you can just keep an eye on things. So you've got that little bit of a backup there, ultimately, I think, to a level. And the only other one is, if you've got so many shops in there, then it's almost like you've got loads of houses. So you can have multiple people there, and they each take their own shop, and sort of sleep in there, and so that's the extra. You've got space, which is always a good thing, and it's generally always quite nice looking inside shopping malls. So that helps quite a lot as well.
You got cleaning stuff as well, like you'll have ways and means of keeping the place clean, because all that supplies and stuff, but you won't have anywhere to grow anything. Not like I'm trying to picture a way in which you might be able to, you get plants and things like that in shopping malls, but I don't think you'd have anywhere to grow anything.
A roof, maybe, if there is
Yeah, possibly. If you can find, if let's say for example, there's a store in there that sells potted plants and things, you might on a small scale be able to grow some food. And in Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, I don't know why I always get them two mixed up.
Yeah,
I'm thinking specifically about the Naughties remake. They're in a shopping mall, and they're on the roof communicating with somebody across in another roof, aren't they? I mean, yeah, there's definitely pluses to it, but for me, I think it's quite exposed, and it's the ability to be able, not so much secure yourself, because I think over time you probably could make it quite secure, especially where you've got they'll all have a security room. There'll be security cameras and ways of monitoring it. It's the fact that you haven't got long-term means to produce food. That's sort of a bigger. You'd have to solve that problem, I think. Next one would be a prison. So in there you will have a yard. It's the same. Layouts differ and things like that, but in American prisons and in prisons in the UK, you'll have outdoor area that is secured. So the means to be able to potentially grow vegetables and things like that, a lot of prisons have them already, have gardens and things like that. There's also a lot available there in terms of the things you can do. There's a lot of prisons that have got rehabilitation programs where you are trying to teach people new skills and trades. So you've got access to a lot of different mechanisms inside of a prison. You'll have a kitchen that you can use on a large scale to feed a lot of people. You will have the means to be able to grow things. You've got obviously a very secure building, which won't just be a single access door to get in. There'll be stages of access to get in. So that's a pretty good. This is working on the assumption, I should say, with all of these, that you've already got in and you and your party are the only ones there. So it's not been hoarded beforehand. Let's say, for example, you've got there, you've set up camp. Now, how is this building going to work for you moving forward? Prison for me is probably. I think it's probably the best one, because you've got access to everything you need. You've got good visibility from the wall or watchtower, or however it's laid out. There's going to be a high view access point somewhere in a prison where you'll be able to see over your walls quite clearly to see if anyone's coming and that kind of stuff. And you can stop other bands of people getting in as well. If people just show up and they want a piece of what you've got, they're not just going to be able to break their way in. It's designed such a way to stop that happening. So what do you think? Where do you stand on the prison situation?
This is one from The Walking Dead, so they explore this across 2 seasons, so obviously it's very interesting. The key one, of course, is it's just not nice. It's like it's very, very practical, as you've just alluded to, which is great. That's obviously what you want to a certain degree, but then it's just the whole living there. It basically is every single person is in a cell. That's where you sleep, of course, so it's that's where you kind of go to bed, that's where you wake up, so it's not the nicest thing. And Of course, it's very dark and dingy. It's not very livable. It's not easy to make it very livable. Survival is the key, part there, and obviously there's a lot of practical elements to it about things that are inside the prison or even outside security and the yard. So you've got exercise, you've got plenty of space to grow stuff as well. So ultimately, definitely the most practical one, probably by far. But again, it's the whole do you survive or do you thrive kind of deal. Depends where you stand on that. Depends on whether or not you would agree with that. But yeah, definitely the most practical.
So, high-rise apartment block, as you see in, we're going to give all these away where we got them from, but 28 days later, it's going to be fairly easy to secure. If you decide that you're going to give up X amount of floors right off the bat for security, and then you use furniture and various other things that you can get hold of to completely barricade a stairwell. I mean, really, to secure it, you just keep throwing things down the stairs. You pick a floor that you're going to stop at, and then you just start backfilling stuff, and there's no way anybody's getting through. If you do it, deep enough, if you've got like a whole flight of a whole floor, you've got 2 flights of stairs, haven't you, to go up one floor in a building. If you filled that entirely with solid objects, nobody's getting through. You'd have to imagine how long you would have to hack away at that. Or zombies definitely aren't getting through, but even organised bands of people, for them to pull all that stuff out and get it out of the way and get to you, it's going to take them so long that you've got plenty of time to formulate a really solid plan, or to keep putting more stuff in their way potentially. So it's good from a secure point of view, because obviously there's really only one point of access. You go in the bottom of the building and then you have to go up. You could disengage the lift if there is one. The problem is you're treed. At some point you're going to need access to something out in the outside world, and well, you're kind of stuck at that point. What do? You can't exactly zip line off the building. If you're in a normal apartment building, you're not going to be taking a helicopter off the roof, and there's probably not even going to be a facility to land such a thing should you ever gain access to one, because the roofs of those buildings are normally all practical engineering based things, like your air ducts and that kind of paraphernalia. So I think it's good for a short term. You're going to be secure until you start running out of stuff, and you haven't really got the space or the facility, the means to reproduce more food. You might be able to possibly have a small garden on the roof, but it depends how many people are there and how many mouths you got to feed and how long you're planning on staying there. It doesn't to me seem like the place to be for the long term. But if you're hunkering down and hoping that things are going to blow over and societies maybe are going to start to come through, or the army have cleared them out, and if you're trying to survive a matter of months potentially, you might be okay. But for the considerable distance, I don't think it's going to work. What do you reckon?
It's probably a very good short-term option. Ultimately, it's a very, very bad long-term option, because at some point you're going to have to leave and bring back supplies, food, etc. And of course, if you are blocking up stairways and whatnot, then obviously that's going to be extremely difficult. So the only thing I kind of thought that you might be able to do there that might make life a little bit easier is almost have like a pulley system going up to windows, where you have the old basket down at ground level, stick loads of things in there, and they're up there kind of pulling it up to make life nice and easy, so you haven't got people trying to cart things up loads of stairs.
Also, it's just occurred to me, but I don't want to be insensitive, but if there's a fire, you're kind of buggered if you've blocked up your only escape route, because in this country we don't have our high-rise apartment buildings are very high, and they don't have fire escapes on the exterior of the building like you might see in American TV shows and stuff like Friends or How I Met Your Mother. But even then, those kinds of buildings are much lower. They're not 20-story buildings and such like that. So if you've treed yourself inside a high-rise building and then there's an accident of some kind and you've started a fire, which is a real-world possibility, you are buggered. So there's really nothing you can do about it, and it's just, yeah, for a short term. And if you're in denial and you think it's all going to blow over, and you want to hunker down for a bit, you'll be safe for a little while. But for a considerable distance, you are not going to want to be there. Supermarket one, I'm going to breeze over because we did discuss that in depth a little bit earlier. But the again, good place to stop by. I don't think the right place to stay for the foreseeable. You could maybe pass, if you could. It's one of those places where I think you go in, get the best you can, get out, or you could maybe pass a little bit of time there if there's no zombies around or no other people around, and you just want to stop for a little while. Maybe days or weeks, then and gather yourself, figure out your next plan. That's probably a good place to do it. But for the long term, not the place to be. Yacht. Now, this one's interesting because a lot of them, if we're talking about a yacht, not just a boat, it's going to be something that's half decent, reasonable size. I'm not talking super yacht. Just a fair size sailing boat. It's going to have a galley. It's going to have bathroom facilities and sleeping quarters. So it's going to be perfectly livable. You can obviously travel under our rules of the zombie apocalypse here. You're going to be able to travel on the seas or waterways without any obstacles. Potentially you might come across the some sort of military, maybe the Navy or Coast Guard or something, depending on what's happening in the wider world. But by and large, you're going to be unencumbered. You've got the problem of what happens when you get to places, but I guess that same problem exists with anything. The other problem we've got is access to food. Obviously, you can fish, so you could be pescatarian. You could live off fish the rest of your life, but you're not going to have means to be able to do much else in terms of food and supplies. For access to new clothing and things like that, or raw material for doing stuff. You are going to need to go on land at some point and retrieve things. In terms of powering it, propelling it, if it's a sailboat or if it's a sailboat with an engine, you've got a couple of options. But if it's a sailboat, you've got wind power, which does put you at the mercy of the elements a little bit, but you can move without having to fuel an engine. If you've got an outboard motor as well and you've got a bit of fuel available to you, then you've got options. But it seems like a pretty good option in terms of getting around and having somewhere to live that is fairly secure, because you could drop anchor off the coast, not very far off the coast, or even in a river that's deep enough, and you're going to be perfectly fine and nobody's getting to you. So that seems, if you want to live like almost a nomadic life and you're going to be travelling around picking up supplies as you go rather than settling somewhere, yacht is probably one of the best ones I can think of. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's got obviously security. Well, I wouldn't even really say security, just the inability of them to ever get to you sorted out. Well, you do have food, but obviously it's very limited in terms of more variety at the very least. So good on that front, but again, do you enjoy life out at sea sort of thing? All you really get to see is, the edge of an island that you want to be on, but you can't, and just loads of water everywhere. So I suppose you still got to be quite careful with bad weather. I've just seen in very other kinds of films, so you've got to be quite careful with that, because of course you lose the yacht, you're done for.
Oh, yeah.
Either way, whether you get to shore or not, almost really. So.
Well, here's the thing: what if you lose the yacht and you're in the water and you can see zombies on the shore? Then you're like, okay, right, now what do I do? You're kind of buggered. I think for getting around, it's a not a bad way to go. For long-term existence, yeah, it really depends on whether you like life at sea. If we changed the yacht for like a super tanker, for example, something really big, you could start a whole community on that quite happily, probably. If you supplied it sufficiently, you did your idea of, going to a garden centre and grabbing as much as you possibly could, and you just dropped anchor off the coast, like, you know, half a mile off the coast or something. It's big and heavy enough that a lot of bad weather is probably not going to be too much of an inconvenience. You can still fish, you can grow vegetables on it and things like that, and plants. Because it's big enough and it's got so much exposure on the top, you could change it and modify it to do all kinds of things and start a small community there and be quite happy. And you've got the security of being isolated. You'll be able, if other people are coming, not just zombies, you can see them coming for quite a distance. And something like that, you can't just climb aboard. You know, you need to have access given to you by the people on the ship. So that's a different story. But for a yacht, yeah, I think good way to get around. Whether or not you like the lifestyle for the rest of your life really depends on whether or not you're somebody that likes being on the water. But it is limiting. You are going to be dependent on being able to scavenge supplies and food and things like that. You can fish, but you know what if you don't catch any fish one day? You're going to go hungry. So you are at the mercy of the elements and nature and things like that. Whereas if you set up a community somewhere, you can dictate your own pace of life a bit more. Theme park, I think, right off the bat, terrible. Really terrible. For all the reasons that Woody Harrelson says in Zombieland. It's, I mean, yeah, great, it's fun and everything, but if you want to be stupid enough to turn anything on, you're going to attract all the zombies. It's wide open and exposed, so you've really got very few places to. You've got nowhere secure to hide that's not going to be accessible from multiple points. In terms of food and supplies, you're not going to find anything because most of it's going to be quickly perishable. It's all junk food, so it's great if you get there quickly, but put on a bunch of weight and slow yourselves down so the zombies can catch you easier. But if a few months have gone by and you go to somewhere like that, you're not going to be able to retrieve much. You're not going to be able to survive there, I don't think. Probably worst one on the list for me. Although still most appealing because it would be fun, but it'd be fun for a short time because you'd die pretty quickly. What do you think?
For obvious reasons, it's not good. It almost, to a certain degree, shouldn't really be on the list, really. But yeah, so obviously turning anything on will attract them. They're probably the best bet you've really got, at least if you're being somewhat cautious, is just maybe only use like arcade machines indoors, and not at night where it's going to light up or anything like that.
I like that. That's your allowance. Like, we're going to survive in a theme park. Only use the pinball machines, so don't turn on the big ones. That's the allowance.
Yeah, or you're allowed to use the actual big rides, but there's a ban on screaming. You cannot scream or anything like that. So, it's.
I do love the idea, the whole. What Woody Harrelson did while you're going around on the ride, take the heads off and stuff like that. That sounds really fun, but to be able to do that, you've attracted them already. He's only doing that because somebody else put him in that scenario and he has to fight his way out. You wouldn't do it by choice unless you were trying to get yourself killed.
I mean, there is a certain amount of security as well, because obviously no one can just walk into a theme park or even really climb over a wall. So they've obviously got the gates and everything, so you don't want them all around the perimeter, of course, but there is a certain amount of security, so you've got that. And of course there's going to be, several cafes, restaurants dotted around the park as well, so there's food sorted and you've got loads of space, so if something does go wrong, it's not like you're really trapped down like an alleyway or something like that. You've got loads of directions to go. And
the food though is that the food is going to be stuff that is not going to. They're not designed to last in places like that, and they don't have storage to keep food for a long period of time. So all the places in theme parks, like burger joints, or cotton candy and things like that. It's like the whole I'm searching for a Twinkie thing, you might be able to find stuff like that that's wrapped up and whatever, but I mean, let's say you find one that's got a load of frozen burgers, and you start cooking one, you're still kind of fairly exposed if any have gotten in, or if any of like the park staff turned, and because it's so big, they've maybe been in like a janitor's closet or something like that, and now your presence has spooked them. And that's the other thing. Before I move on to the last one, out of all these places, this is predicated on the assumption that you got into these places and you've cleared it out, and now you're setting up, which is the best one to set up in. But the other question is which one is the easiest to clear out? I'll come back to that after we've done the last one, which is the Winchester, or in fact any pub, but because that is probably the most famous zombie pub, we'll go with that. Obviously you've got a cellar, which you can't access from them, and they have openings from the street, but you can't access them. That needs to be opened from underground. But they don't. No pub that I've worked in a number of pubs in my youth, and I've never seen a pub that had a secure door to the cellar. Like anything other than just a normal door. They're not locked off, or they're not bolted doors or anything like that. So you kind of you're trapped in until you, like in Shaun of the Dead, you're trapped in there. When they break in, you have to go up the ramp or the lift to get out, where you would normally load in the beer, and then you're out on the street again. In terms of access, the doors have got deadbolts, but they've got glass windows. You've got plenty of windows, which they're not windows that are going to be reinforced in any way, and pubs are almost always in places that are easily accessible, because that's kind of the point of them. So you're going to be in a town, even if you're in a village, you're going to be like in the main road in the village. You're going to be a focal point, I guess, of any zombies in the area or other people in the area. So food wise, let's see, depending if it's a pub that does food, you'll have a kitchen there, you'll probably have upstairs somewhere to sleep and things like that. I don't think it's incredibly secure. You'd have to do a fair amount of fortification, like shutting off doors and things like that, to keep yourself safe. But I think it's probably a matter of time before they got in. If we're assuming zombies are in the area, I think it's a matter of time before they come through, in much the same way they do in Shaun of the Dead. Probably not the best place. You could hunker down there for a little while, but I don't think it's the place to be for the long term. What do you think?
Yeah, agreed. This is one where I kind of imagine this is like a one night stop off on your journey. Ultimately, so you just kind of go in, be nice and quiet, sleep off for the night. Obviously, you can have a few drinks depending on what's still available within there, and then when you're off in the morning, then you kind of take any other particular drinks you really like with you. And if they wind up sort of slowing you down a little bit, you can turn them into a weapon and just smash the old bottle over one of their head and use the rest as a sharp object, whatnot. So there's always that benefit, but it's definitely not long term. Absolutely not.
So summing up, for my money, the best one to survive in, although as you said it wouldn't be the most luxurious, you could do your best to try and make it, beautify it, but the most practical one is the prison. What do you think? Are you going with the same one, or are you going to pick a different
one? For the sake of talking about the same thing, absolutely, prison has to be the best one overall. Theme park I keep looking at almost as a bit of a, they're kind of like, you really feel you can somehow make it work, but then that could be like
that's
dangerous
the Peter
last
Pan
words.
In you, that.
Yeah, it could be dangerous last words. Of course, you kind of think, there's always going to be a way. But
if I'm in my prison and then one day I get like a carrier pigeon from you with a telegram that says, "I've figured it out, come and visit the theme park," I'll be so stoked for you, because I'll be like, "That's brilliant! I'm glad he's not dead and he's finally figured out how to make the theme park work." And that would be the best thing that could have happened in a zombie apocalypse. But I mean, like, let's take Thorpe Park for example. As a quick aside, You have to, once you go in there, there's like a big dome thing with shops and stuff in it. Then you have to, no, immediately you have to go over water, don't you? You go over a little footbridge that's not very long, maybe 50 metres or something, and then you're in that big dome bit with the food places and the shops and stuff. So, and they've got quite tall metal gates, so zombies would be able to reach through. But in terms of climbing over, I think human beings would have a tough time. And I haven't been there for years, but I seem to recall the gates go right to the top of that opening. You know, you go through your turnstiles and get your tickets, and then you have to go through. There's like big gated area, isn't there, that funnels people in, and you go over this little bridge, and the rest of it is it is a little island, if I remember rightly, that particular theme park. So they're not going to be able to come at you from any other direction. That one in particular, there's obviously different ones, but yeah, they're not coming at you from multiple directions. You could fortify the entrance. It is fairly secure. You're quite exposed. I guess you could take like a play area, or you know, one of the grassed picnic areas, and you know, repurpose it to grow food or something like that. And you've got kitchen facilities. Problem is powering it, a lot of the things, because they're all running off the mains. But I guess, you know, if you're there long enough, I'll leave you there in your theme park, secure, and then you figure out how to get it all working after a while, and they'll come over. But yeah, for practicality, prison's got to be top of the list. Quickly, which one of those on the list is going to be the easiest to clear out? Having a quick skim down, I'm going to say pub, because it's the smallest. And it's got pubs are one level, they're ground floor. There's not a lot of other rooms to them. You know, everything's accessible from the main area. Like the upstairs, there's usually an upstairs living area that's accessible from the pub area itself. So's the cellar, so are the toilets. So you walk into a pub, and a quick scan around will pretty much show you every room that's in the pub, the access to them at least. So yeah, I think for my money that's probably the easiest one to clear zombies or people out of, and then start hunkering down. Although, as we've established, not the best one to survive in. What do you reckon?
I would go with a yacht.
Well, yeah.
I just kind of thought you could also,
if it's docked,
get rid of them, even without killing them, just throw them overboard. And then you haven't got to worry about the clean-up of the blood, you haven't got to worry about the smell of any bodies or anything like that. You can just literally chuck them overboard, and then you can actually move away from them.
Do you know what I was thinking? Why my brain overlooked that? Because I picture the yacht being out in the water already, rather than being at a dock. If it's at the dock, then you know, probably the easiest one actually. Certainly easiest to access. You just step on board, don't you? And there'll be one access to down below. But if it's in the water, then you've got a different, slightly more of an obstacle. I'll concede that. We'll go with yacht. So easiest to clear out is going to be the yacht. Best one to survive in for the long term is going to be prison. So moving on from all that, there's only two questions that I've got rattling around in my brain, and the first one is, why now more than ever are preppers so commonplace? That it's got a terminology, there's a culture around it. Is it, you know, that people around the world can sort of sense impending doom? Does the world now seem slightly more screwed than it was 30 years ago? It's difficult to compare these things in your own head, in your own lifetime, because when you look back on your life, you wouldn't have been informed on, you would have been ignorant to a certain amount of things as a kid. And, you know, from my perspective, the world seemed like it was a safer place when I was a kid than it is now. But that might just be a fallacy, a story I've told myself. So it's a difficult one to get an answer to, but maybe something to think about. Put something in the comments. Why do we think there are more people prepping for doomsday scenarios now than there have ever been before? And the other thing is, zombie culture has been consistently popular in various societies all over the world in the mainstream, at least for almost 100 years now. Dating back to, you know, origins in different cultures, it changes and modifies slightly, but in mainstream culture, where, you know, there were movies and TV shows, games, comic books, things like that, for example. It's been around and it's been consistently popular. When you think about other mythical beings, mummies, werewolves, vampires and the like, they tend to come and go in popularity. There'll be a chunk of time where, certainly in the mainstream, and by that I mean if you're not actively seeking these things, you wouldn't have heard of a popular show, movie, etc. There certainly seems to be big chunks of time when these things aren't happening, and then they'll come back into fashion again. But with zombies, there is always something. There is always some kind of platform for them. Like if there's not a popular TV show on, there will be a popular game. If there's not a popular movie, there'll be a popular TV show, and so on. There is always an outlet for them. They're always popular. It's consistently popular, and it has been for a really long time. Why is that? Why do you think that's just something that people are latched onto and they seem to identify with a lot? I know this kind of thing's been talked about a lot over the years, and George A. Romero would say probably that it's to do with consumer culture and things like that. But how the way the world is and things like consumer culture, these things adapt and they change and progress, and society moves on. So what is it about the modern day that still makes it so popular, and what was it in the past that made them so popular and allows people to identify with it so much and find them so entertaining? There's probably going to be a certain amount of people that just like the blood and guts and gore and things like that, but there'll be something in there deep in the back of your mind that identifies with it as as an outlet. So let us know. That's our 2 cents on zombies and how to survive a zombie apocalypse, and vehicles, properties and scenarios and all the rest of it. There is so much to cover in all this. We could probably do a whole series on it, but let us know if there's something you wanted to discuss, or you got opinions on it, you got your own plan to bug out, you think that we missed out something, or there's a glaring flaw in one of our plans. There probably is. We're open to criticism. Give us a shout in the comments and let us know. But that's the end of that on zombies.
If you've made it this far, then score one for the Republic. Whether you've agreed with us or not, feel free to evacuate your emotional baggage in the comments section. Hammer that like button as if you were Thor doing a home renovation. And if you subscribe, there is a slight possibility that your life will instantly go all the way up to 11. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.